続いてはケネス・ギアスさんによるセッションです。サイバーセキュリティのための同盟力。ケネス・ギアスさんはベリーグッドセキュリティ社に勤務するセキュリティ専門家でいらっしゃいます。それ以前には陸軍国家安全保障局、海軍犯罪捜査局、NATO CCD COE のアンバサダーなどを経て、米国政府で20年間勤務した方でいらっしゃいます。Our next session is Alliance Power of Cybersecurity. Please welcome our speaker, Mr. Kenneth Gears.
Thank you so much for your attendance. I study the connection between cybersecurity and national security, and I've been doing that since '93. So before long, it will be 30 years. So a couple of words on World War II. Winston Churchill, after the war, said that signals intelligence and decryption of enemy communications was decisive in the war. And many analysts say that it shortened the war by up to 2 years. And it's hard to see that this is not a critical piece of national security when you consider the weight of such argument. Now, fast forward to the time of the internet and the World Wide Web. Already NATO's first major operation over Kosovo in Serbia, we saw hacker attacks against not only infrastructure at NATO, but in Washington, D.C., and tactically among the units that were fighting. So what it showed was, as soon as the World Wide Web existed, there were opportunities to target weapon systems as well as leadership from anywhere in the world. And I was posted to Estonia during its crisis with Russia in 2007. And here you can see the use of a cyber attack to force another country to make a political decision. It was fairly simple, but again, it was called Web War I for a reason. It was an experiment. It was an effort to use a denial of service attack for political purposes. 1 year later, there was a real war in the country of Georgia. And here, for the first time, we saw the combined use of computer network operations together with military operations. And this occurred weeks before the conflict until after the conflict. And so today, you do not send soldiers into war without hacker support. This is clear, and this is easy to see in military doctrine of many nations that is published. 2 years later, in Iran, we saw that computer code could actually be a substitute for missiles and for a traditional military attack. A 0.5 megabyte of code, in this case, turned off 1,000 nuclear centrifuges. Normally, those would be bombed from the air by a plane. But in this case, it happened quietly, and it took a long time for the victim to figure out even what happened. And this is the sort of era that we're living in now, in which computer network operations or cyber attacks give you an alternative means of power an alternative means to use force against a rival. And that happens sometimes when you don't have any other option. I was also in Ukraine in 2014 teaching cybersecurity at university. And there I got to see many different kinds of cyber attack, including against the presidential election, which the United States should have seen as a warning, because the CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team that investigated the attack and the intrusion, said that it was the most sophisticated code that they had ever seen and investigated. And it was all to accomplish a political goal, which was to delegitimize democracy in Ukraine. Beyond that, we saw military attacks, economic attacks, diplomatic attacks. US diplomats had their communications captured via traditional intelligence, uploaded to YouTube, and announced on Twitter. So Ukraine is definitely the hotspot for cyber warfare today. And the reason is simple: it has a real war ongoing. And real wars do not happen without cyber war accompanying them. In 2016, in Washington, maybe the biggest hack in history, right? If you consider that it might have turned an election in Washington from one candidate to another, literally changing the course of history, right? The ability merely to steal information and to leak it at politically opportune times. This is powerful, and it goes to the very heart of information operations, which are now run in cyberspace. How do you affect the decision-making of a leader or the decision-making of a target population? And all of these, I believe, happen every day. They may not be so successful, but adversaries are running them because they are cheap and because they move quickly, and they can penetrate specifically into social media. And in these social media bubbles, where you have trusted companions and friends, provide you information that is difficult to deny. You have already allowed these people into your friend groups. And so you will see their information. And it's a hard problem to solve. We are experiencing that in the United States again in 2020. In the country of Belarus, between Poland and Russia, there is currently quite a revolution taking place. And you can see here the number of people who voted for a new candidate and who basically have been put down by the current government, showing the power of violence and the power of repression against the majority of people can still happen even in 2020. This story is far from over, but there are a lot of cyber elements to it. One of the things that the security forces are doing is trying to cover their faces so that they cannot be identified by people and their identities posted to the World Wide Web. However, even just their eyes are being captured now with software, and citizens can tell only with the eyes who the security personnel are, and they're publishing their personal details online. So watch this story because it's only getting more intense. The violence has recently grown very serious. Now, at NATO headquarters, we have something that I think is a different case altogether from Belarus. Here you have a political and economic power that leads to a military and a cyber power. But ultimately, it's the alliance concept that is so important. If you're running hostile cyber attacks against democracy or against a country in Europe or in North America, in this case, now remember that most of the countries in the EU and NATO are the same, in fact. When NATO or the EU jointly investigate, run best practices in cybersecurity, run intelligence and law enforcement operations together as a group, this is between 30 and 40 countries acting together. It is literally the world's only possible cyber superpower. One country alone, I know from personal experience, working 20 years at the Pentagon, even the United States is quite lost when it comes to attribution and investigation of cyber attacks, because there is only one internet and only one cyberspace, and the United States must have allies. So in this case, NATO and the EU are working together ever more closely every day. And you just think of the power of, let's say, 35 intelligence, law enforcement, network security staff working together. There's multiple agencies doing that in each country. So already you're talking about hundreds of first-class agencies working together. And this is the cyber superpower. So let's look at a couple of things that the alliance is doing. They have declared cyberspace as a domain of military operations, the same as air, land, and sea. Cybersecurity is a core task of collective defense within the alliance. International law applies every bit as much in cyberspace as it does in historic, traditional space. What we're seeking is stability. We are seeking international stability and peace within this new domain. And the only way we're going to get there is strength through diversity, a defensive philosophy, and partnering with the EU. And so again, this is between 30 and 40 countries working together. I worked between 2007 and 11 at the NATO Cyber Center in Estonia. And here you can see recently Angela Merkel, who visited the center. Cybersecurity has that much magnetic power. I got to be the first researcher ever to be posted to the center in 2007. And today it's 25 nations on staff full-time. And I've seen many delegations come from Japan and other countries in Asia, all the way to see what's happening. At the tactical level, more at the military and intelligence officer level, there's a lot happening. Some of the things that I'll mention include the integration of national cyber contributions. Computer network operations are often classified or compartmentalized in ways that keep them in a secret folder. NATO is figuring out how to tap into them so that they can be used for NATO operations. Toward that end, NATO is building a cyber operations center that will manage this effort for the entire alliance. And currently, there is a partnership with industry and also malware sharing program, right? When nations discover malware, they can share it. I was in Ukraine just last year when they joined the malware information sharing program. They were very excited about it, and just think of the potential when large countries with very capable intelligence and law enforcement begin to share about cyber attacks, campaigns, actors, results of investigations. This is how we will move forward internationally on cybersecurity. Here is a book that I just published through Atlantic Council. And here's a link. It's a free download. And I talk a little bit about the history of cyber war, about the importance of collective defense, as well as a major study that I did for NATO on the cyber dimension of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And then I finish with recommendations. And one of those recommendations, I can tell you, is a voluntary desire or a voluntary move to not undertake cyber espionage within the alliance, right? Nations today, I think, are addicted to running computer network operations specifically just to collect information. But if we can stop that within the alliance, we can get a lot farther in not only promoting trust within the alliance, but also isolating bad actors, right? When we do find cyber espionage code, it will be quicker and easier to figure out who the ultimate source and actor was that undertook the operation. So that's my talk. Thank you very much. Please send questions to Slido or join me in Whereby after for a discussion. And I'll let you go on since it is time for your next talk. Thank you very much for joining me.